If you've never heard of Andrew Tate, well, you're one of the lucky ones. Although there are plenty of disturbing personalities on social media, few are as vicious, ugly, and influential as Andrew Tate.
I know women, because I made a lot of money for women. Let me tell you something. They ain't ready for the big man slap. I got a big hand. If you're the kind of person who feels like they need therapy, you're useless.
Never say go into bed. Go into bed is emasculate. Cowards need sleep.
Forget the sex part. That's a distraction. My dick can stay in my pants. I'll just start beating the shit out of you. How about that? We walk in the bedroom. I start kicking your ass.
On TikTok, Tate's videos have been viewed billions of times, mostly by young men. And over the last couple of years, as his influence has spread, a growing body of evidence has been uncovered showing that Tate's empire wasn't just harmful, it's criminal.
Now, the online influencer Andrew Tate has been detained in Romania.
In 2023, authorities in Romania charged Andrew Tate and his brother with rape, human trafficking, and forming a criminal organization to sexually exploit women. But before all of this came to light, two journalists received a tip that would send Jamie, Tahsin, and Matt Shea on a 4-year journey into a bizarre and disturbing subculture and bring them face to face with Tate and his army of supporters. Along with 2 documentaries, one for Vice and the other for the BBC, Jamie and Matt's 4-year odyssey is all laid out in a book they wrote called Clown World. I'm Kathleen Goldhar, and this is Crime Story. Jamie, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
What an odyssey it was. Have you guys ever covered anything as crazy as this story?
No.
I don't know. I think we've both covered some pretty weird things, particularly in our time at Vice. Matt's covered targeted individuals, these people that think they're being followed by the government. I've covered people that think 5G is taking over their brains.
Yeah, but Jamie, nothing like this.
No, this was still by far the strangest, weirdest story we ever covered.
Let's start at the beginning, Jamie. Tell me about Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan, who isn't as charismatic or as well known, but they are joined at the hip.
Yeah, they're completely joined at the hip. When I first met Andrew Tate, he told me he would never live without his brother, and he's never been anywhere without his brother. They are 2 Anglo-Americans who were born and raised in Chicago, moving to Luton, England in their teenage years after their parents' divorce. And from speaking to Tate ourselves and speaking to people that knew Tate, it seems Andrew's primary ambition in life has pretty much always been to be famous. Rich as well, but primarily famous. And Tate got involved in kickboxing while in Luton, and he was relatively successful in that, particularly in his early 20s, mid-20s. But he was also desperate to become famous, and this was at a time where UFC didn't exist. Kickboxing wasn't really a route to fame. So Tate made forays into reality television. But none of those appearances really worked out for them. They didn't break through into sort of the mainstream culture. So instead, they turned to social media.
And Matt, describe for me the influence that Tate eventually sort of garnered on social media, especially with young men.
It's difficult to overstate his reach and the speed as well at which he gained that reach, because in a matter of months, he became the most Googled man in the world, one of the most viewed people on TikTok, and had millions and millions of followers on Twitter as well. At one point, a survey was done in the UK which determined that over half of young men and boys had a positive view of Andrew Tate. And in the US, Australia, and many other countries, similar statistics are also true at the time.
What was he tapping into? What were they finding appealing about him?
I think the main thing that you see when you're a young man scrolling through TikTok and you come across Tate is a man who projects a sense of extreme wealth. He is always surrounded by flashy cars. His famous Bugatti, one of his most common catchphrases is, "What color is your Bugatti?" Obviously, the implication being that, you don't have one. And also a man surrounded by lots of beautiful women who seem to be at his beck and call, and a man who's good at fighting. Jamie mentioned that he was a kickboxing champion, so he displays all of the characteristics of a sort of almost caricatured version of the wealthy alpha male.
Yeah, the first ever meeting I had with Tate, he told me what he was selling to these young men is essentially the James Bond lifestyle. He was like, I'm a guy that has infinite money, infinite power, infinite women. I travel the world doing whatever I want. And he was selling that idealized vision of what he saw masculinity as to other young men.
And Jamie, he had that money, right? Like, it wasn't like sometimes you see, and you talk about that in your book a little bit, there are some of those social media guys, and it's easy to do, is to kind of fake it. But it seemed as though the Tate brothers had the money.
Yeah, they had some money. So when it comes to dealing with Andrew Tate, it's incredibly difficult to find where the truth lies, because he has an amazing track record of constantly lying and constantly inflating his own value. He'll tell you now that he's, a billionaire, one of the richest men in the world, one of the most connected, powerful men in the world. A lot of that isn't true. But Tate, Andrew and his brother Tristan both did have, millions of pounds, millions of dollars that they made, in their own words, through this webcam company that they started around 2014. So alongside trying to become famous on reality television and pursuing a career as a social media influencer, they were also running a webcam sex business where they claimed that women who often started as their own girlfriends would work on webcam for them, performing sexual acts for men who were watching, and that those women would then give, in most cases, they claim 80% of the money to Andrew and his brother Tristan. And this was how they claim they made their first millions, which they used to fund this now lavish lifestyle they were showing on social media.
Matt, tell me a little bit more about the webcam and how we start to sort of unpack the ugly, misogynistic part of Tate.
You could say that Tate's an early adopter of e-pimping, in that he is recruiting women. Some of these women would argue that they were groomed and manipulated. They, in many cases, believe themselves to be one of the Tate brothers' girlfriends. At the time, they would be kind of gradually pushed into performing on webcam. And at one point in the UK, there were a number of women living in a house with both of the Tate brothers all performing, being watched over by them. And one of the ways in which they made money was not just through the subscriptions and the payments that the webcam subscribing men would give to the performers, but also they would manipulate them, they would scam them. Sometimes the Tate brothers themselves were actually operating the webcam accounts. So it wasn't actually the women chatting to these men.
One of the other ways that we know that he made money was through the men subscribing to become like the Tate brothers. So, Jamie, can you tell me about his PhD program, which doesn't stand for what we think it stands for?
Yeah, so this was one of the first courses that Andrew Tate began selling. This was in a time where lots of masculinity influencers and pickup artists were selling courses to other men, teaching them how to get better at making money or meeting more women or having more sex. But Tate's course was pretty unique, as it was kind of molded around his own life and career in the webcam sort of empire company sphere. And this course was called Andrew Tate's PhD, which stood for the Pimping Hose degree. And it was sold in conjunction with another course called Webcam Dreams. And they were kind of seen as a pair. So you do PhD course first, and then once you've done the PhD course, you can do the Webcam Dreams course. And what the PhD course does is essentially teach men how to go out and find women who might be particularly vulnerable to being able to sort of coerce and groom into becoming webcam sex workers and giving the money to you. And in the course, you'll kind of get Tate sat there in one of his classic, incredibly tight jackets, nipples poking through the shirt, of course, and he's got a whiteboard behind him, and he's kind of taking you through the play-by-play of, okay, well, this is how you find the woman. You ask them these questions. If they say this, get rid of them. It's not going to work. They're not going to go for webcam.
And especially pause this video. If I'm giving you examples or I'm talking about things, try and apply them to your own life, or where you've tried things in your own life or your own current situation, and see how they fit.
And crucially, what Tate says in this course is that the women cannot know that you are interested in them for webcam when you start speaking to them, and they cannot know that you're interested in using them for webcam when you have sex with them, but that you must have sex with them before you get them on webcam. So essentially, that's what the PhD course did. It was a recruitment course for teaching men how to find women, trick them into thinking that they're looking for a relationship, and over a gradual period get them to a position where they think they'd be willing to work for them on webcam. The Webcam Dreams course is then like his sort of put it into practice conversion course for once you've got, a girlfriend in quotation marks to the stage where you think they're happy to go on webcam and give you the money. You can then use the Webcam Dreams course for the sort of practicalities of, how do I set up the actual platform? How do I withdraw the money without it going to her account? How do I, keep control of the password so that she could never log in? How do I monitor who she's speaking to so she can't run off with a client? All of these things that, again, are very, very reminiscent of how a pimp might have treated one of their prostitutes.
The blatantness with which he says it is really shocking.
Yeah, I mean, he called it his pimping hose degree, right? If you were to ask him that now, as we did, he would say like, oh, it's just a joke. Don't take it too seriously. You're so liberal. But if you actually watch the content of the course, he is teaching you how to be a pimp, but he's teaching you how to do it in the age of social media and online sex work, because he says, we pimps used to go out and recruit women in the streets and find vulnerable women there, but now you don't need to do that. You can just use Instagram.
Matt, the other sort of side of your investigation was trying to interview him and trying to get as close into his inner circle as you could. And you do eventually visit him more than once, but your first trip to Romania, you guys eventually got invited into the war room. So tell me what the war room is.
The war room is the most expensive and supposedly elite of the kind of courses that Andrew Tate offers.
Something. If you're not a war room member, we talk about the war room. You have to understand that the little snippet bits of information you get do not compare to the secrets which lie within its walls. The war room is the greatest thing on the planet, bar none.
It costs several $1,000s a year to join. And for another several $1,000s, you can fly to Romania to participate in something called the test, which is what we did. And ostensibly, the idea of the war room is you meet a network of powerful men and learn how to become rich and successful alphas like them. So we were with around 150 other men who had all paid to be there to meet Andrew Tate, their idol, in person. And we flew to Bucharest and then drove up to the mountains of Transylvania, where this giant hotel became the setting for this event called the test, which no one really knew. No one knew what it was going to be, even though they had paid, $5,000-$6,000 to be there. Everyone sat down in a giant auditorium, and the war room generals appear and begin to kind of set the scene for what's going to happen. And then at a certain point, Andrew Tate himself comes out onto the stage. He's dressed in military fatigues. And he explains that in 3 days' time, each person has been paired with a professional MMA fighter and will be given the opportunity to fight this person on live Romanian television.
Now is decision time. You are getting in the cage to fight a professional fighter who is trained to hurt you. Anyone who is fighting, please stand up. Anyone who is not fighting, you can stay seated, and we will begin the other program.
It was basically a kind of test of masculinity that he just foisted upon everyone in the room. And that's what he's best at, is kind of prying open male insecurity with a challenge, a direct challenge, whether that's through TikTok, look how rich and successful I am compared to you, or in this case in person, by challenging all these men to do something incredibly stupid and dangerous. And
speaking of doing something incredibly stupid, you said yes.
I said yes. Jamie tried to convince me not to. I wanted to kind of see where it went, and do the actual journalism. And I felt that saying no wouldn't give us access to Tate and his inner circle to the same degree. But the men who said no, what was happening was they were being forced to sit facing a wall and journal about essentially how shameful they are as men for saying no to this stupid fight. The men who said yes had to undergo, blood tests, get weighed in, and then on day 3, enter the octagon in Brasov and fight a professional MMA fighter. I say fight, I mean get beaten up by.
Give it up for Matt. Did I say it right?
I'm very excited for it. Now, as soon as the bell goes, Matt has passed the test. I know he's going to lose, but wow, he's actually in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you didn't exactly spend much time in there, and you do have it in all of your documentaries. How much did it hurt? Like, how badly were you hurt?
It wasn't terrible. I mean, I think I did bruise my rib. Basically, it was a pretty interesting experience, to be honest. Like, I mean, I think in terms of not in how it was couched in this kind of pressure cooker of male insecurity, and the shaming of men who said no is obviously absolutely terrible and the exact opposite thing that men need. But the opportunity to like overcome a fear like that and the kind of sense of confidence that it gives you, I think is potentially valuable. And you can see why, as a kind of ritual of manhood, it makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I just got in there and essentially I wasn't going to try and fight this guy or win. So I kind of just like ran away from him in a circle. And then like kind of
Hugged him.
I kind of hugged
like
him. Because that's how fights end on the ground. So I kind of, quote, grappled him, but really just kind of slowly hugged him, almost requesting him to end the fight on the floor, which he did.
He gets stripped to the ground.
And there's going to be a ground and pound finish. But that is it. The referee calls it.
And then, yeah, I had passed the test and gained the respect of Tate and the War Room generals.
I think, like, from the perspective of someone who was kind of observing in a sense, right? Because I was just filming everything Matt was going through. I had this like security blanket of a camera. You could really see the difference in how Matt was approaching it compared to the War Room men, right? Matt knew he was going to get beaten up. So you kind of, as you said, danced around and hugged him. But the other men who said yes were completely different. They had really been inoculated in this Tate ideology where they thought they too were alphas and they could overcome this hurdle and maybe actually even win this fight, even though these are, you know, normal, ordinary guys with desk jobs. A lot of them are out of shape and they're fighting professional MMA fighters from Russia and Poland. But they got in there thinking, I have a chance to win this. And because of that, they went quite hard against some of these fighters. And in response, the fighters really, really hit back. So although, you know, Matt might have fared off okay with a bruised rib, we saw one guy get completely knocked unconscious and had to be taken away in an ambulance to be taken to the hospital. Multiple guys had faces cut open, noses cut open, concussions. So there were real physical consequences to these men stepping into the Tate's game as well.
And also in the lead up, Andrew Tate and his generals did quite a lot of theater to make the fight seem more dangerous than it actually would be. There was a fake publicized argument between the top generals where one of them was saying, this is too dangerous, you know, they could get seriously hurt. And then the other generals said, no, it's going to happen. They had kind of plants kind of walking through, pretending to be injured, that they had been injured in a fight. You know, they had lots of theater and stuff going on to make people think that this was really serious and they could get hurt.
Tell me about this idea of the generals and all of their sort of like call names.
I'm Alpha Wolf.
Okay.
My role is to be Alpha Wolf.
Okay, fair enough.
Life is all about.
You know, as the woman that I am, I'm like, this is so ridiculous and silly. Like, this looks like children, idiot boys doing something dumb. But these men took it seriously, and it was tapping into something, obviously, that they were needing. But there was a lot of, like, mysticism and army sort of military ideas that went around. So, Jamie, can you give me a sense of what were they talking about? What were they feeding to these guys?
Yeah, so there was like kind of two different strands to it that you're touching on. One was the military order sense of it, and then the other one is kind of a more spiritual sense. And they were both really pushed upon the men at all times. So from the military aspect, Tate is training these guys in physical aspects as well as mental ones, right? They're learning how to meet and potentially groom women, but they're also learning how to get in shape and be particularly fit and learn how to fight and all of these things. And there's also kind of a rigid structure within the war room where, you know, Andrew Tate is at the very, very top. Then you have his brother Tristan alongside a man called Iggy Semmelweis, who was kind of the the spiritual high priest of the war room, as he referred to himself. And then you had a rung of men below them who were the generals. And we were always kind of intrigued by that military element to it. And we'd spoken to Tate about it in the lead up to getting access to him. And it was something he was very wary of over-egging, because he like outright said to me at one point, I don't want you guys trying to make us look like a militia group. When we dug into the war room a bit more, we found out that a lot of its members were actually members of other militia groups. But then there was this real spiritual side to it, which was really, really pushed by both Andrew Tate and this man, Iggy Semmelweis. And they referred to their religion as Tateism. They referred to Tate as sort of the second coming of Christ. He was like a Christ-like figure to them. And they really venerated Andrew Tate's father, Emery Tate, as kind of this John the Baptist, the man who prepared the world for the Tate brothers. And that is really how a lot of these war room members viewed Andrew Tate, as this divine figure who had been prepared for them by Emery Tate Sr. to sort of reclaim masculinity.
Yeah. And I don't, you never want to give a kind of cult like this too much credibility, because at the end of the day, it is essentially more about exploiting people and taking their money than it is about any real spiritual doctrine. But if we had to kind of give it, the most benefit of the doubt and trying to find what that spiritual doctrine is, I think there is a pretty unified ideology which is centered around the idea that violence underpins absolutely everything. The world is a struggle, and nature is struggle and violence, and that to overcome that as a man, you must compete. Everyone is always trying to commit violence against you. You must commit more violence back against them more successfully. You should always be stressed out. You should always be unhappy. You shouldn't be happy as a man. Being happy is for women. You should be unhappy. I mean, Andrew Tate himself, he drinks like several cups of coffee a day. And when he tried to get me to do the same, I was like, I don't want to do that. I'd be stressed out. And he was like, you should be stressed out. You should set your blood on fire. That's how you conquer the world. That is what being a man is.
Anxiety is a good thing, is his refrain. If you're not anxious, you're not a real man.
Matt, you called it a cult.
Yeah, I mean, let's try and define what a cult is. I mean, a cult, unlike a religion, exists primarily to exploit its members in some way. Whether you are the women who are being groomed and coerced into sex work, or whether you are the men themselves being recruited perhaps first through TikTok and social media, when you see Andrew Tate as this appealing figure and then filtered up through his courses. If you're a young man who is falling for this, you are being exploited by Andrew Tate. He's getting your monthly subscription from you by convincing you that you are unhappy because you're not a real man. So in that sense, it is a cult. But in other senses, it's a cult too. The lionization of Tate himself as this Christ-like figure, the isolation that they force upon you. So they tell you to, if your friends think it's a bit weird what you're doing by joining this course and hustling to this degree, then cut them out of your life, because they're just going to decrease your value as a man. If your parents, are trying to convince you not to do this, cut them out of your life. Cut your teachers out of your life. Cut your psychologist out of your life. Stop taking your medication. This is a cult.
Yeah, and I think the more we uncovered about them, the more they sort of ticked all the traditional hallmarks of cults. So particularly, that isolation factor that Matt spoke about, but they would also really, really sort of reinforce this in-out mentality that everyone inside the war room, they're your brothers, you can trust them, they've got you for life. But anyone outside, in clown world, as they call it, hence the name of our book, in their own words, they're worms, they're subhuman, they don't understand you. And it's this real dehumanization of anyone who doesn't come from their world. And then I think, the other sort of red flag as to like, oh, this is a cult. And, not just that this is a cult, but that the men who created it are aware it's a cult, and they're actually borrowing, lessons and methodologies from cults that have existed before them. These guys were obsessed with something called neuro-linguistic programming.
I was just about to say.
Yeah, do you want me to hold off on it? Or?
Yeah, no, go ahead. I mean, Neuralink it's, you mentioned that. I covered NXIVM and Escaping NXIVM, and I know a lot about cults, and that every time that pops up, you're like, oh, ding, we're a cult. So just explain what that is.
Yeah, so neurolinguistic programming is kind of this pseudoscientific belief in the science of language and the belief that you can use language, your tone of voice, the pauses between words, your intonation to directly influence the way someone thinks and then acts. And Tate and the War Room, and particularly Iggy Semmelweis, its spiritual leader, were obsessed with neurolinguistic programming. They spoke about it constantly in their internal Telegram group. They believed that they were using it on the women that they would recruit, so they would use neurolinguistic programming to make them more vulnerable. But Iggy and Tate would also use it on their followers as well. And there's a lot of debate about whether NLP or neurolinguistic programming is even real, or whether it works, or what effects it has. But the fact that these men believe it works and they're actively using it on their followers and using it on the women that they're trying to recruit kind of screams out, this is a cult. These are men using nefarious methods to try and exploit everyone else in the world for their own personal gain.
So, Matt, I mean, one of the things that often happens with cults, and it happened with NXIVM and all that, is the tipping into the criminality and the ability for law enforcement to actually prove that that's the case. Webcam businesses can be legal. Gathering and fighting can be legal if it's all under consent. There's a line that's very hard to prove that you've tipped into criminality, but your investigation really found very obvious examples of criminality. So can you talk to me about that? How did you see it go from just being able to get together and talk about becoming a better man, even if it involves theoretical violence, to being something actually illegal?
Jamie first had an inkling that there could be something illegal going on when Tate was, to be fair, openly bragging about manipulating women into working for him in this webcam sex business. And when we went to Romania, we asked him specifically, Jamie said, ask him about the lover boy method.
Have you heard the term lover boy before?
The lover boy method?
Yeah. Romantically involving yourself with a woman and then making money off of her in some sort of sex adjacent industry.
Firstly, I would call the webcam industry far closer to psychology than sex.
One of the concerns that people have about that lover boy method is that
let me correct you, because I'm a professional.
Is that it's similar to, or people might consider that a form of grooming.
Okay, so I'm a professional, so I have to challenge you on it. Nobody's concerned by anything that happened 10 years ago when a bunch of girls got rich. There's not a single female complaining.
Do you think there's not a single female complaining?
Have you seen one? Tell me.
So we had an inkling, but after we returned from Romania, we began to hear allegations relating to his webcam sex business back in the UK before he moved to Romania and set up the War Room. And we heard from initially 1, then 2, then 3, and still more women that he allegedly either raped or physically abused them during the time at which he was employing them in the webcam house. And it turned out that actually one of the reasons he was kicked off of Big Brother, the reality TV show, was not what the public were told at the time, but was actually because he was under investigation at the time for rape. We then went back and made another documentary, and this time we had access to the internal leaked messages of the War Room. And that's when we uncovered something that we could never have imagined. I mean, we uncovered in total, around over 3 dozen potential victims, although the number is highly likely to be much higher. Women who were targeted for a specific type of grooming that was taught within the War Room, something that was called Pavlovian conditioning, which we can explain. It's quite interesting. We can explain, if you like, the method of grooming that they teach.
Yeah, please do.
So, step 1, you have to kind of create a social media account that gives the impression of wealth, whether that means taking pictures at fancy restaurants, having a kind of a Rolex or whatever. Step 2, you're messaging thousands and thousands of women. Out of that, maybe 5% or so will respond. And out of that 5%, maybe a much smaller percent will agree to go on a date with you. And out of the percentage that agree to go on a date with you, you ask them to bring you on the first date a bar of chocolate. And the idea there is that the women who say yes to that are the most vulnerable to further manipulation. Then you enter into a relationship with this woman. She believes that she is just your girlfriend, but you're gradually building up the pressure. Can you make me breakfast at 5 a.m. tomorrow? Can you make me a cup of coffee? Make me another cup of coffee? Do my laundry? Do my cleaning? If they don't obey, you punish them with a lack of attention. If they do, you reward them with sex. This is something that they call Pavlovian conditioning. You increase the pressure over time, and then eventually, maybe even a year later, you begin to see the idea of us making a webcam account together, but you keep the passwords and the accounts and all the money. So the scary thing is you could be dating a man right now and not know that he is actually in this kind of chat group with a bunch of other men trying to manipulate and brainwash you over time into being a webcam sex performer.
Jamie, did you see that come to life? Do you know that it worked? I mean, it's one thing to promote it and talk about it, and this chat room was full of men, and some of it might have been bullshit, just like machismo sharing. But did you guys find that this actually happened?
Yeah, so rather depressingly, it did work, and it worked for a number of the men. And the way we know that is we ourselves interviewed women who, were put through this process and came out the other end and realized what happened to them. They were groomed by other members of the war room who were taught directly by Andrew Tate, or we spoke to women who had been groomed by Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate himself. And we also know that it was quite effective for a number of these men because they had this policy of posting receipts, as they would say. And these might be pictures of how much money was made on a particular webcamming site, but we also saw pictures that were, women with bruising all over them from where they'd been punished for not making enough money. Women working on bare concrete floors in garages in residential areas of the US where they said, we're keeping her in the basement. She's staying in here until she makes X amount of money. Then she can come upstairs and have sex. So we saw that it did happen, and it happened on a pretty alarming scale. This is a group that had over 300 men in it around the world, all attempting to do this thing and providing each other advice. So the process did work, but it required an incredible amount of cruelty and manipulation from these men to be able to do it. And not only that, it required targeting some of the most vulnerable women that you could possibly find. And these are women who are 18, 19 years old. Some of the men spoke about specifically trying to target women with bipolar personality disorder because they thought they would be more vulnerable to it. And in other cases, we saw, men having conversations with minors, women that were under 18 years old. So when people ask us about when did you first start to suspect criminality with Tate, it was pretty much straight away, because what he is describing in his courses is illegal. And this is something we come up a lot against when we speak to sort of diehard Tate fans, is they go, well, how can it be human trafficking? He's not tying anyone up. He's not putting people in vans. He's not smuggling them across the borders. But what most people don't understand is that's not what the majority of human trafficking is. The majority of human trafficking is emotional coercion, emotional abuse, tied with physical abuse. But it normally begins in kind of a grooming relationship scenario, not just grabbing someone off the streets and bundling them into the back of a van. So everything that Tate describes and teaches to these men, if you believe that he actually did what he's saying he did, that is a crime. It is human trafficking.
Matt, eventually he's charged, right? So can we talk about the criminal charges against him?
Yeah, so, on a slightly more positive note, and in a sense that also speaks to the fact that this is trafficking, many of these women eventually realize that they're being manipulated and they fight back. They either go to the authorities or they go to us as journalists and, they try and expose what's happened. There's currently a number of investigations and indictments active and cases against the Tate brothers. Tate and his brother are accused of either trafficking, raping, grooming, or abusing at least 48 alleged victims in total. Both of the Tate brothers deny all of these allegations and have repeatedly kind of characterized them as a coordinated attack against them by what they call the Matrix, which is this woke conspiracy to silence them from releasing men from the shackles of woke feminist whatever.
Right, that they took the red pill and see the world for what it is.
Yeah. And they presumably will stand trial at some point soon, and in Romania. And then after that, if they are found guilty or not, they will be extradited to the UK to stand trial for the other investigation. Although they're now on the run in the US, so that complicates things.
The controversial social media influencer Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan are believed to have left Romania on a private jet heading to the US. The Tate brothers, who are...
You mentioned that they're in the US. Where are they?
Well, currently they're in Las Vegas. They were just photographed cage side at a UFC match, after also being warmly greeted by Dana White, the CEO of UFC, one of the longest standing Trump allies in the US, and someone who Mark Zuckerberg recently appointed to the board of Meta as part of his kind of pathetic drive to seem more masculine. But anyway, so this is the crazy thing, right? This is such an unprecedented time. It's difficult to know where to start. But the Tate brothers, whilst being under investigation in Romania for human trafficking, under judicial control, were not allowed to leave the country. It appears that the Trump administration pressured the Romanian government to remove that judicial control and allow them to travel to the US.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to touch on that UFC event quickly and like how strange it was to see it unfold on social media. Like Andrew Tate at this very moment is probably, aside from Jeffrey Epstein, who's, if not here anymore, Andrew Tate is the most famous alleged human trafficker, rapist, and potentially child rapist in the world. He is the most famous one. And yet he got a hero's welcome at the UFC, where he was sat ringside a few seats away from Kash Patel, who is currently the director of the FBI. This guy has an active investigation against him in Florida. And yet this man is not only allowed to leave Romania and travel to the US, but get a hero's welcome at one of the biggest sporting events in the country. It's really, truly strange times we're living in.
Imagine it would be political suicide for an ally of the president to invite, for example, Jeffrey Epstein to a sporting event. It's insane.
Well, it's like one of the primary Republican platforms of recent years has been like, we're going to end child trafficking. And yet a man who is accused of child trafficking is welcomed with open arms.
Hypocrisy doesn't seem to matter anymore, which is so upsetting. But speaking of, I found this so upsetting. Listening to you now, it's upsetting. It makes you feel angry and scared and just like crazy, right? Because you can't, you think how bad can it get? And then every day it gets worse. You guys were living this for 4 years. You're still in it. I mean, I'm talking to you today. How are you doing?
I think we're good. I mean, it was definitely the most exhausting story I've ever reported on. And in different ways, I think it was very exhausting for Matt, because Matt obviously was sort of the public face of all of our reporting. These sort of hosted documentaries. And like, I'm sure Matt won't mind me saying, he got it hard online. I'm talking really violent, graphic death threats. Tristan Tate posting pictures of Matt's girlfriend to his millions of Twitter followers. Like really, really petty, cruel, mean stuff. Luckily, Matt is a very strong-willed man, and I would really say it was like water off a duck's back. I think it exhausted me in the sense that I became so obsessed with the cult-like tactics of it and the political connections that it really was all I could think about. And it did kind of invade my home and personal life to an extent. And I just have one vivid memory of, I was in my living room having a phone call with Tate. He was on speakerphone because I kind of like to pace the room while I'm on the phone calls, particularly with someone like Andrew Tate. And my partner walked in, heard his voice and just went, oh, for fuck's sake, and walked out the room again. Because I think for her, and same for Matt's partner, she had 4 years of She can hear Andrew Tate videos playing in our home because every time he uploads something, I'm like, well, I need to watch it. She's got him playing out of speakerphone on my phone at least once or twice a week while I'm having these calls with him. And it did really take over our lives, but in a way that I'm really sort of quite glad and proud that it did and we allowed it to, because as you said, this is a really, really important story. And while on the surface, someone like Andrew Tate might seem like this sort of stupid cartoon character guy that you can point and laugh at and say, God, how stupid must anyone that follows him be? But he is incredibly powerful, incredibly influential. His fans don't see him that way. They see him as a serious political figure who can guide their lives. And when that figure is telling men that, you know, women aren't really human, they shouldn't be able to vote, they shouldn't be able to drive, they're stupid, then we should be worried. And we should treat this story as an important story. And we should give a voice to the women who have been direct victims of him and be their champions. And I'm incredibly proud that we spent 4, 5, now 6 years doing that. And I think I speak for both of us when I say that we will keep reporting on this story until the bitter end.
Well, to our detriment that we ignore or make fun of them now, because I think we should have learned by now. We can't do that anymore. We have to take it seriously. It's real.
Definitely. And I think that's where like the media has more of a responsibility than they really understand. I mean, particularly early on when we were first making this film, lots of our colleagues, lots of other people in the media were very worried about us giving a platform to Andrew Tate. This was something they always said to us, you know, should we even be making this film? Should we be giving him a platform? And our argument always was, we don't live in a world anymore where mainstream media, or whatever you want to call it, are the arbitrators of culture. Social media is the arbitrator of culture. Andrew Tate became the most Googled man in the world without a single mainstream press interview. So actually, our real obligation as journalists and as the press is to report on those things fairly and accurately in a way that does not happen on social media.
Matt, sorry, we sort of got off on a tangent. And the harassment you got was really awful. But you're a tough guy. You go into the the cage. How are you, though? It must have not been super easy.
I mean, something recently that happened, which was pretty funny, was Andrew Tate minted a meme coin called Fuck Matt Shea, along with a bunch of other meme coins, and then kind of got his followers to buy it, inflate its value, and then at one point, the total market cap for all the coins, like making fun of me by Andrew Tate and his fans, was $4 million. And then he rug pulled and they all lost their money. But I mean, yeah, and I do get these ridiculous death threats and stuff, but it doesn't bother me in the same way that if, a homeless, mentally ill person walks by is maybe on drugs and they shout some insane stuff at you from across the street, you're not going to let that bother you either. I mean, the internet is full of insane people. What is worrying, though, is that the overlap between that world of absolute insanity and then the kind of actual political social hegemony is now colliding. We never expected that the person that we were investigating for human trafficking, for serial rape, for exploiting, millions of young men around the world would be someone who was then invited by the Trump administration to come back into the country. This is the crazy thing is we didn't expect, the Trump administration to actually ally itself with these people.
I also think politicians are often very transactional, and Tate is seen as this guy who appeals to young men, and young men typically aren't that politically engaged. They don't vote, but there is this belief that they could be quite right-leaning. And we've had that here in the UK. There's a politician called Nigel Farage. He's the leader of the Reform UK party, the main voice behind Brexit. He's been a long-time champion of Andrew Tate. They met at the CPAC conference back in 2019, and it appears to be simply because these guys want to appeal to young men and they feel like by associating with Tate, they'll get some of that appeal sort of rubbing off on them. But Tate quite cleverly, and you could question whether a lot of people do this, right? We've seen it recently with Russell Brand. You get these sort of criminal allegations and you start drifting towards the right because it allows you to cry cancel culture and freedom of speech, etc. Tate's been working on that for a long time. So In 2019, he went to CPAC. He went and flew to New York and spent time with Donald Trump Jr. and got a photo taken with him at Trump Tower. He spent time courting Mike Cernovich. He spent time courting Alex Jones. So he has, alongside his alleged criminal activities, been really trying to ingratiate himself with that kind of MAGA right area of politics, because it does then perfectly tee him up to be able to say, oh no, the reason they're arresting me is because of the politics. It's none of this trafficking stuff. It's not the pimping. It's not the alleged allegations of rape. It's just because I said, don't wear a mask. It's because I said taxes are too high. Whereas in the reality, none of that is in any of the criminal indictments. The criminal indictments are made up of thousands of pages of Andrew Tate's WhatsApp messages, CCTV surveillance, statements from victims, all really sort of solid, credible evidence that makes up traditional criminal trials. That is what Andrew Tate is facing.
Well, you guys, amazing work. I could talk to you for another 6 hours, but thank you for speaking with me. Thank you for the work. And just really a pleasure to talk to you both.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Since recording this interview, the Tate brothers have returned to Romania, but they would not say whether they intended to stay there or not. You've been listening to Crime Story from CBC Podcasts. We release a new episode every Monday, so please remember to follow the show in your podcast app. You can get our next episode a week early on CBC Podcasts' YouTube channel or by subscribing to CBC Podcasts' True Crime channel on Apple Podcasts. In addition to early access, subscribers to our True Crime channel also listen ad-free. Crime Story is hosted by me, Kathleen Goldhar. Our producers are Nikki Manfredi and Mitchell Stewart. Sound design by Julian Uzielli and Mitchell Stewart. Our senior producer is Jeff Turner, our video producer is Evan Agard, and our YouTube producer is John Lee. Media sourced from Vice and the BBC. Executive producers are Cecil Fernandez and Chris Oak. Tanya Springer is the senior manager of CBC Podcasts, and Arif Noorani is the director of CBC Podcasts.